All right. Yeah, thanks, Joe. Like Joe said, I'm Travis. I work in Bayfield County Land Conservation in Wisconsin. Um, and just a little bit of an outline before we get started of what we're going to cover in the webinar. We're going to talk about why this publication was developed, who was all involved in the production of this publication. And then Quita and I will be going back and forth on just some highlights within the publication itself. It's a 23-page publication, so we're just going to touch on some of the high points of it and then show you where to find it. So hopefully you can use it in your work and also take a look at it as well. So the idea came about for this publication a few years ago when I received a call from a lake association member in Bayfield County on the Eau Claire Lakes chain. Jim was looking to basically provide information to landowners regarding lakeshore erosion and possible best management practices or stabilization techniques that could be used to help stop or reduce lakeshore erosion. So when he reached out to me and was looking for this information, I told him I knew we had a lot of information on shoreline restoration, how to reestablish vegetative buffers along the lakeshore. But I said I would need to look into see if there was a document available regarding just specifically lakeshore erosion and stabilization practices. So I reached out to some of my counterparts in other land conservation offices that do lake work. Our Wisconsin Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection, we refer to as DAGCAP. Our engineering contact that works with the northern counties on lakeshore projects, and also the extension lakes, basically just doing some research to find out if there were some information that we could hand out to landowners, and really didn't come up with, I'll say, an all-inclusive guide to that we could really distribute to lakeshore owners. So that's what started the conversation, and also inevitably an outreach project. So this group was made up of nine northern Wisconsin land conservation offices that were at the table working on this publication itself. Stacy Daney, who is our engineering contact for, I believe she covers 14 northern Wisconsin counties, and she's really been assisting in doing this work for over 20 years with land conservation offices. And then Patrick Goggin, who's the UW Extension Lake Specialist, was also involved with this, the development of this publication. So those were the three, basically the three groups or entities that really were instrumental in putting this document together. And then once we had a lot of the information and content put together, we reached out to some of our, basically our organization, which is referred to as Wisconsin Land and Water. They have a graphic designer on staff, and he was basically a communication specialist, and he really enjoyed taking on this project as far as the design and layout of what it would look like. And that Elliot Meyer was very much an important role in putting this all together. Illustrations within the document, as you'll see, we put in quite a few illustrations just to kind of give people a graphic of what some of these stabilizations look like. Karen Engelbretson from KJE Design, you probably recognize that name if you've seen other lake conservation publications out. She's done a lot of those illustrations before. So these are I'll say the key players in developing this document. And this started in, our first meeting started in 2019. I believe we met in February 2019. Thankfully, before we were able to meet in person, because this was pre-COVID, we were able to have 6 in-person meetings prior to COVID coming on and changing everything. So 6 meetings that really helped us get a lot of the groundwork established for the content of this publication. That face-to-face meeting, I would say, was very important. If we had to go back and start this during COVID, I can't say we would have been as successful. So like I said, we had 6 meetings in person, and then eventually 4 additional meetings virtually during COVID. So all in all, 10 meetings with the group. That first meeting in February of 2019, when we put this out there as a potential project, those 9 counties and the UW Extension Lakes person, Patrick, as well as Stacy, we really hit the ground running on that first meeting. Everybody was on board, and we started to lay out basically an outline of what we wanted to see in this document, and what was our goal to develop this publication. And it really was to develop a landowner friendly document that could be used either with land conservation staff as they're out there doing field visits with lakeshore owners to kind of showcase some of the work that can be done and the different options that are available. That was ultimately the goal, but also in that first meeting, like I said, we did an outline of what we wanted to see in the publication, and you can see that here on this slide, some of the objectives of the content that was going to be put into the publication. That first meeting, we also split up into groups and looked at the 4 levels, which we're going to get into later in this presentation, about which 4 levels, what kind of content we're going to, what are the stabilization practices we're going to use or showcase in this. And we split up into groups, and we each had a category to work on. And like I said, we'll talk about that as we go into this further. So this is just a little bit of the background introduction, the shoreline assessment tool, which we're going to talk about next, decision table. And then ultimately, when the document was being put together by Elliot, he recognized that we needed a couple other components, such as just even a description of what causes lakeshore erosion, and also how to help identify some of the soil types that are on your property. And then the 4 levels of stabilization, like I said, that we'll be talking about. So with that, I'll have Quita kind of talk about the shoreline assessment tool, and we'll kind of go over the highlights of what's in the document itself.
Thanks, Travis. So as Travis mentioned, the real value here in this tool is that we're able to stand on a shoreline with a landowner who might not understand all the ins and outs of the soil erosion on a shoreline, and be able to show them a picture that if this practice is put in on your shoreline, this is what it's going to look like. I think it really helps them to be able to visualize these things. We also wanted to do a couple other things with this document to assist landowners, riparians, to know a little bit more about how lakes function and the fact that they are living systems. So what happens on one part of the lake can have an impact to the rest of the lake. So one of the things we created here was this shoreline assessment tool. We wanted to give people an opportunity to take a critical look at their shoreline, to walk them through the process. You know, things that they might not be aware of that were going on their shoreline because of what happened by was in place by past owners. And then other issues that are affecting their shoreline, artificial water levels, boat wakes. And so we start with, and this might seem familiar to some folks who've looked at other assessment tools, but we want to look at wave energy because that's going to have a big impact. So basically the fetch across the lake and the impact that that might be having. Is there aquatic vegetation in the water right adjacent to your shoreline? And with the idea there that we're actually giving them that opportunity to understand that aquatic vegetation is actually beneficial, especially for quelling wave energy. What kind of vegetation might be on their shoreline? This probably anybody who works on lakes understands that we want to have vegetation on our shorelines, and we are battling some of these suburban aesthetics that people are bringing with them as they move on to lakes, and not realizing that actually a nice tidy lawn is not what we'd like to see on a lake shoreline. We'd like to see a lot of messy native vegetation. The slope, of course, is going to be very important. The steeper the slope, the more opportunities for soil erosion. The impact that impervious surfaces, paths, stairs, decks, those kinds of things could have in allowing the runoff, water runoff, precipitation runoff, the opportunity to gain speed and get moving across the landscape. So we're introducing those concepts of just the physics of water and the impact that can have on your lake shoreline. As Travis mentioned, soil type, and we all know the different soil types are going to have different reactions to erosive forces. And then the other thing that we want to keep in mind before we start doing anything on anybody's shoreline is how they're using their land, that recreational use. So that we make sure in the planning process that we are not putting in a practice that is not going to be compatible with how they're using their lake. And then it becomes a less desirable activity that we're doing there. So for those of you who in Wisconsin who have applied for DNR permits, for waterway permits, these probably all look very familiar because they are part of some of the work that you might do to do the energy on your shoreline or an erosion intensity scoring process, those kinds of tools that you would do to do a permit, to apply for a permit. So you would end up with a score. And this is, again, a way to allow a landowner to take a little bit more of a clear-eyed view with those scores and what's going on their shoreline. We do know that people tend to be much more forgiving about what they do on their shoreline and maybe a little bit harsher about what their neighbors are doing. So hopefully this will give them, we hope, a little bit more of a numbers-based view of what's going on. And the thing is too, we want, with this whole assessment, as I said, we want them to understand that this is a living system, that perhaps from one lake to another, they're not the same. So if they have a friend on another lake who does this, conditions are going to be different, and their scores are going to be different, not necessarily because of what they're doing, just because of soil types and slopes and aquatic vegetation, those kinds of things. So armed with their score, they can look next, actually probably would jump next to all the different activities that they could do, the different practices. But what we wanted to do at some point is to have a table so you could compare one practice to the other. So along the left side of this table, we have increasing levels of engineering required to do stabilization on the shoreline. So from top where you would just do a no-mow all the way down to where you're installing some serious riprap. And then looking at what's appropriate on different shorelines. So for example, if you're requiring that your shoreline be accessible from any point along it, you'd be able to walk straight into the water. You're less likely to want to put in riprap because you're not going to be able to walk across the riprap without breaking a leg, right? That's on the left side. Across the top on the right side, we're looking at the uses and benefits. And we've broken this down within the descriptions of each of the activities or the practices, but we wanted a place where a person who's not that familiar could look and kind of compare and contrast all in one go. So level 1, we're looking at the lowest cost, the minimal amount of technical knowledge. This is something that a landowner could install on their own. And we're talking vegetative buffers. If they have done their assessment and realize, oh, we only have a few patches of area where we're missing a buffer, we really have one of those lower scores. We're not too worried about massive wasting soil erosion into the lake. This is something that they could actually implement on their own. The other part of that too is that this would also be in addition to maybe a more engineered practice to improve habitat along the shoreline. So ideally we'd be looking at trying to have natural shorelines, but that's an ideal case. We're hoping to encourage maybe a little bit of planting, even if it's just a few feet of buffer right at the water's edge. We in my case in Vilas County, we would really like to encourage people to do a full 35-foot buffer, but sometimes that's not possible. And if they are lacking a buffer, that we cannot force them to put a buffer in, as long as they hadn't taken it out themselves. But this is a way to encourage them. And with a lot of the new things, like planting for pollinators, there seems to be more interest. So the 2 levels here would be either just quit mowing, put the mower away and just see what comes up. In a lot of cases on our shorelines, there's still a pretty decent seed bank. Or alternatively, put a little bit more funding and energy into planting a buffer. So that would be the first level of these practices. The next level up would be to do some bioengineering with the natural fiber products. So you might be aware of using core logs or my mind's blanking right now, but some of the other products that are made locally with aspen fibers and straw matting, those kinds of things. And that's what would fall into this category. So we would want to make sure that planting is done in conjunction, because these biodegradable products will eventually biodegrade. And the idea is that we're trying to limit any kind of soil erosion before or while the plants are growing, and eventually the plants will take over. Obviously, these are at a more low energy sites. You would be putting them into back bays and gentler slopes. And they are, so what I want to say, they are also an opportunity for the landowner may be able to install themselves, put these in themselves with a little bit of effort. So again, lower cost.
Yeah, and thanks, Quita, too. We're kind of given a snippet of each level here. Each level has multiple practices associated with them in the publication itself. So like Quita just explained, level 2, I believe there are 3 different bioengineering options in that level, but we just kind of want to, again, hit on the highlights of what each level kind of entails. And like Quita just talked about level 1 and level 2. Level 3 here, we kind of titled this one Wave Reducing Natural Timbers. This is where we have actually 4 different practices in this category. This one that we're showcasing here is based on tree drops or fish sticks. But also in this category, we include log revetments or rootwad revetments. So just like you see in Quita's previous slides, we try to do this illustration just to show what each practice would look like with the drawing, but then actually have actual documented photos as well with each practice. And kind of similar to what Quita talked about in that table, but basically where it's appropriate to be using some of these practices, and maybe what some of the difficulties you might be faced with as well, or where it's maybe not such a great location to be doing it, such as fish sticks or tree drops in high energy sites, stuff to avoid. So again, some of the highlights of this particular level are, this is more of a natural wave. Try to reduce the wave action on your shoreline using trees. Again, this is going to be more for your low to maybe moderate energy sites. But, aesthetically looks nice, but also can provide some of that fish and wildlife habitat as well. So that's level 3. Like I said, there are 4 different practices in that category. Level 4, which is the last category in the document. This level we kind of entitled Riprap with Bioengineering Techniques. This level actually has 6 different practice types, all of them with just what it says, riprap at the toe, with most of them having some kind of bioengineering component. This particular page, it's showing riprap at the toe with geogrid lifts, vegetated geogrid lifts above the riprap. Obviously, as you can tell from the pictures, this is more of a site that has some steeper slopes, more severe erosion. So inevitably, you're probably going to be looking at a higher cost project. These are more likely, I guess, to be higher energy sites, and is also going to require some form of engineering as well. This is also the level where we're in our world, in the land conservation world, using NRCS practice standards for our engineering on these projects. The most with the riprap anyways, the 580 conservation standard with NRCS is what we're referencing or looking at for riprap. And then the bioengineering component is usually referencing the engineering field handbook, chapter 16, where it's talking about bioengineering on stream bank and shoreline erosion projects. So this is definitely a practice where, like I said, is more significant lakeshore erosion cases. So that's kind of I'll say the 4 levels that we cover in the document itself. Obviously, each level has, like I talked about, many different practices within it. And hopefully can kind of illustrate what they look like on actual lakeshore projects, actual projects that were done by conservation staff with assistance with our DACAP engineer, Stacy. And then hopefully this kind of can showcase some of that work. Quita, did you have something else you wanted to add before we talk
That's it.
about?
You got it covered.
Okay.
So,
Do we-
in Wisconsin, we are lucky in that we have two different programs that we can assist landowners to implement these practices, especially on those level 4 kind of bioengineering with the riprap. Those can get very spendy. This year, I'm seeing things that are between $150 to $200 per foot on a shoreline, so quite expensive. So we have the DNR has this Healthy Lakes program that allows landowners or lake associations or other organizations to, I guess not the landowners, but the other organizations to apply for grants to install some of those less intense, the plantings and the tree, the fish sticks, and they have a couple other practices as well to allow the landowners to implement or install them themselves, or perhaps to pay to have a contractor to do it. And then through DACAP, all of our land and water departments have some funding to assist landowners to install these more intense practices, and also we have access to engineers that help us design these practices for those installations.
All right, thanks, Quita. So kind of lastly, before we talk about where to find this document and this publication for your own use, this is the back page. Like I said, it's a 23-page publication. There were a lot of people involved in the production of it. The team members are listed down here. We talked about that earlier, but also the intended use of this publication is that this is an educational guide, that we still advise riparians, landowners to seek further professional guidance, whether that be with a private engineer or your local soil and water conservation county or district. But that, again, this is just to provide riparians, landowners with a visual guide of what some of the options are. It's not always just riprap. So just to kind of touch on that. And then also we reference all of our photos. All of the photos were taken by, with the exception of one, I believe was from a DNR staff person, and all the other photos were taken by land conservation staff during construction of these projects. So also acknowledge there were quite a few people who reviewed this publication, including multiple DNR staff that had a hand in providing edits and looking at it from the shoreline zoning standpoint, as well as the permitting aspect of these projects, which we do caution in the beginning of the publication that to seek out and contact any permitting agency that would be involved, primarily your county, DNR, or Army Corps of Engineers, or tribal offices as well. So I guess we have one more thing before we get into where we can locate it. Just want to put out there that we do have the document available electronically, which is where we'll get to next and showing where to find it. But also we were able to print it thanks to Wisconsin DNR Surface Water Education Grant. Heather from Iron County applied for the grant and we were awarded the grant to to print of the document. With that grant, we needed match funds. So there are, I believe the state is broken up into 8 area associations, all of which contributed towards match funds with the Wisconsin Land and Water Area Associations, as well as a donation from Wisconsin Valley Improvement, who was also very interested in this document for the flowages that they manage on the Wisconsin, in the Wisconsin River watershed and on the Wisconsin River itself. So many partners involved, even just in the printing of the document. And I'm glad to say that all 72 counties in the state received a box of the publication. 165 publications were in each box, and a box was sent to every county land conservation office in the state of Wisconsin. So as far as a hard copy goes, there are some available with the local land conservation office in Wisconsin. So to find the document, to have it available to review electronically, it's being housed on the Wisconsin Land and Water Association website. I think Joe or Quita put it in the chat to find the link for it. So I'm going to just click on that and hopefully we can navigate to where it's located. So on the Wisconsin Land and Water website, there are tabs across the top. If you go to Members Hub, that's where you're going to find.
Travis?
Yes.
Sorry, you're gonna have to switch your screen. We're still looking at your slideshow.
Thank you. It's still on. It didn't change to.
No.
Okay.
You might try unsharing it and then sharing the
Yeah.
screen.
How about now?
Good.
All right, thank you. So again, the Wisconsin Land and Water website is where the document is being housed. This is the front cover. So you can click on it here to review, to take a look at it. But there are multiple different versions of the publication. We made, thanks to Elliot, again, at Wisconsin Land and Water, he made different versions of it, a printer-friendly version. So if you wanted to print it out, you can download it and print it. An email version, so this is, I'll say a little less resolution. So it's not as big of a file to email. If you wanted to email it, you can download it that way and share it, as well as a web version. So if you wanted to house it on your website, you can also have it that way. So that's the easiest way to get access to it, as well as to share the document, is to essentially go right to the Wisconsin Land and Water website. All right, I think that's everything that I can cover. I do want to just say, as you can see from the title of the document too, we focused this, we call it Shoreline Stabilization, but as in the title it says, we really are focusing on inland lakes and flowages. Originally, this discussion was to include potential stream banks, but we figured that would kind of lose focus, and the document would be probably too large and overwhelming to encompass all. So the focus is that this document is on inland lakes and flowages. So Quita, do you have anything else, I guess, before we get to questions?
No, I think you covered everything. Thanks, Travis.
All right. Well, thank you guys, Quita and Travis, both. Super interesting stuff, and I'm excited to start using it in Michigan and in MGLP stuff as well. So I suspect that folks across the MGLP area are thinking the same thing. First question, and you kind of covered it in your walkthrough here. I don't believe I saw a professional print version. I think it was more of a home printer download that you could do. Is there a professional print version available if folks wanted to send it to a printer and have a box of 200 printed off for themselves?
That's a good question. Quita and I think, are both smiling at that. There is a commercial print version available. I'll say it was created because that's how we were able to print this one. I don't believe it's on this site. I'm not sure that we have it available, but we probably could. Maybe it would be something we could house also on here. Yeah, so it's a good question. It's not on the site, but we could add it. And you're right, this print version that's on the Wisconsin Land and Water site is basically for your home printer or office printer. So if that is something that would be people would like to have, maybe they could shoot me an email or something, and I could reach out to Land and Water, because they are the ones that made the different options available.
Sure. Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks. Yeah, and I was just sort of trying to anticipate if there was, we got that question with some of the documents we put out through the MGLP. So yeah, I think that'd be helpful. So I will email everybody who is part of this webinar who registered. And in that email, I will CC Quita and Travis. So if you have interest in following up with them for a question regarding access to that print copy or any other questions, feel free to reach out to them through that follow-up. So we are now in the Q&A part of our presentation here, and I want to just remind folks, if you do have questions, please use the question and answer function. You can hover your mouse over the little dialog box at the bottom of your Zoom window, click on that, and that's how you can best enter questions. So I want to make sure I don't miss them, and I do have a question from the audience now. So this is a person. They've got a location where the biggest problem is stabilization. The ice is dragging everything away and or crashing into the lakeshore and ruining their stabilization attempts. And they're proposing using bags of cement or large boulders to break up the ice. Have you heard of that approach being used? And if not, or if you don't recommend it, do you have recommendations for ways to fight ice scour and heave?
Well, we're both smiling because we've been well trained by our engineer to not fight ice. She will not. We don't go near ice. Ice is always going to win, unfortunately. That's the situation with ice. The one thing we do tell landowners is to try and retain as many large trees on your shoreline as you possibly can if you're in that kind of a situation. But yeah, if you have really big ice issues, ice is going to win.
Yeah. Travis, were you getting ready to add something?
Well, no, I just to kind of back up what Quita's saying too, is that obviously ice can move riprap, and so far, at least at the toe, that's been the best defense. I would not knowing where the individual is at, but maybe reaching out to, again, if their land conservation office to look at it. But I know a lot of times that there's there's very, you're limited. We're limited as well to all of our project requiring DNR permitting too, and subject to what is allowed as well for hard armoring. But sometimes you can get, sometimes you can get innovative, but sometimes you also can't win against the ice.
It's unfortunate, and we tried to address this a little bit with this document, but it's one of those things where I find frustrating is that unfortunately, when people are buying property on a lake and they don't understand how lakes operate, it's all new to them. And so they're not looking at those kinds of things. And a couple of years ago, someone invited me to look at the riprap, or at the ice shove on their shoreline. As I was standing there looking back past the house, I could see ice ridge after ice ridge after ice ridge. So this is a lake where ice ridge action had been going on for, centuries, thousands of years. I guess if I were looking at that property, that'd be the thing that would catch my eye, in terms of wanting to buy it, like, this could be a problem. But that's just an educational thing. And I feel very badly when I get on a property like that, where I'm just like, this is natural,
Yeah, I think you guys are spot on that, some of that ice heave is a natural process and is to be expected on a lake. And sometimes too, what we see in Michigan is a lot of where folks have allowed erosion to occur and they've lost that shallower slope. And then that allows the ice to, when you have that steeper slope, it allows the ice to grab the shoreline and heave it harder. So we try to do some re-sloping to deflect the ice, but I think you guys are exactly right. Let's see, we've got some comments coming in, just complimenting, this is a great visual and helps folks to do their visualize how folks might do their shoreline stabilization. Jim Giffen mentioned that there was a presentation on ice heave that the Tip of the Mitt Watershed group in the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council in Michigan did. So you can find that on their website as well. A question, can you comment on integrating large woody habitat with bioengineered shoreline restoration? I think, I'm not sure what the context is here, whether the interest is from a fisheries perspective or wildlife for that matter, or whether it's more erosion / water quality type concerns. But can you guys talk a little bit more about how to effectively pair that with the bioengineering?
You've done more of that, Travis, with root wads and stuff.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sure Quita probably does too, we try to look at multiple aspects of it, not just, look at planting as well as, is this appropriate site for a tree drop to add habitat and reduce that wave action on the shoreline. One project that we did recently was a log revetment to try to incorporate maybe more of that natural stabilization using trees. And we had very good success with it. A landowner is actually the one who installed it. We were able to get it permitted by DNR. And we hope to use more of it in the future. And basically it was using tamarack logs along the shoreline as a stabilization means. And so I think we're looking at many different aspects to doing that. I mean, we always incorporate some sort of native planting with whatever stabilization project we're working on, but then also, can we add structure or fish sticks or tree drops or log revetment along with that. So, and that's kind of what we tried try to capture in this publication too, that it's not just a one size fits all in every situation. And a lot of that too is bringing in like your local fisheries biologist from DNR. I know they play a big role in working with tree drops and fish sticks, and can help you with choosing, you know, whether that site is appropriate or not. So I think, yes, not all sites are the same. But if you can work with DNR fisheries and work with your land conservation office, we can kind of look at it, many different aspects of it. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's at least I think what we're trying to do. And I'm sure Quita is the same.
Yep.
Thanks. Yeah, and Ralph, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them. I had a question. I noticed that you guys use 2-to-1 as kind of a shoreline a slope recommendation, and I was curious where you guys came up with that. I see different numbers, you know, from different sources, and so I was curious where you guys came up with 2-to-1, how that's gone, where that comes from.
Well, the 2-to-1, like for the at least for the riprap part, is in the 580 NRCS standard. I mean, that's, if you can do less, it's usually better. So 2-to-1 is usually the minimum to achieve. And again, that's based on, for riprap, that's based on the NRCS standard. But oftentimes, yeah, if you can do better, if you can achieve better, that is definitely more ideal and more stable.
Yeah. Okay.
That does kind of set us up for a little bit of a conflict with the current shoreland, what's it called? It's that legislation from a couple of years ago, which does permit landowners to go to, I think it's like a 1.5-to-1 slope or steeper, with much larger rocks. But we tried to maintain our focus on those NRCS standards, especially if we're going to be using tax funding to install these. So
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. You know, I know that this is fairly recently released, and it's only been out in the wild a little while now. Have you guys been getting feedback from property owners or the public on it? Did you focus group it at all, or how did, in terms of people's ability to understand it and use it, you know whether it's sort of hitting home or how it is operating as an outreach tool?
I will just say I was at the Wisconsin Lakes Convention or Water Week Convention last week in Stevens Point, and in handing out a few, we had some here. We were sharing them with contractors for landscaping contractors. I gave some out, and also some contractors that do lake management, those kinds of things, and they really liked them. They thought they would be valuable, and I handed them to a few other people, and my inbox is starting to fill up with people asking for more copies. So right now that's the only measure of success that I have. But from everybody that we've talked to, that we've shared them with, they think that they're going to be really useful. This summer we'll obviously see us out on the landscape with landowners actually using them. So
The snowball is growing quickly.
mhm.
You've created a monster. Well, congratulations. I think it's a really neat product. And
Thank you.
a shameless plug for an associated product, a related product, I should say, the MGLP's Shoreline Living document. I think the two of them
Yes.
together are
Mhm.
really nice complements, and we sort of had a similar experience to you guys as well. So yeah, I think it's a really, really effective product when you're trying to communicate with property owners.
I think so too. I think handing them out together, that Shoreline Living with this, because really we want to see as much native vegetation on the shorelines. It's, you know, if we have these erosion problems, we'll address them, but really the more vegetation, the better. So,
Mhm. All right. Well, I don't see any other questions in our Q&A function here, so I'll give the last call for questions to participants. And while I do that, I'll say thank you to Quita and Travis. Really appreciate you guys sharing your experience, and of course this document and everything that went into it. It's super interesting to see, and it's always a little bit anticlimactic when we end a webinar and we can't clap and you know the audience show their congratulations and appreciation to you. So you'll have to put up with just me saying thank you.
thanks very much for the opportunity to share this.
Yeah,
We appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Well, we were happy to. For folks on the webinar, feel free to keep an eye on the MGLP's newsletter and check out our website if you want to potentially enroll or register for additional webinars. We still have, I believe, 2 more left this spring. So check those out. And with no additional questions, I think we will wrap up for today. So thank you everyone for what you do to conserve lakes, and we will see you next time.